Here's a question that feels strange if you say it slowly enough. What happens when the most powerful man in the world would rather be alone, writing in a journal? By the glow of a single candle, in a tent, in a war he didn't want, Marcus Aurelius would scribble thoughts to himself. Not to history, not to his people, not even to his children, just to himself. Reminders, notes, fragments of sanity. Because while others saw a Roman emperor, he knew he was just a man. A soul with duties, a heart with cracks, and a mind that, like all minds, was at war with itself. Born into wealth, surrounded by opulence, adopted into power. He should have become arrogant, spoiled, detached, but something in him resisted. Maybe it was temperament, maybe it was education, maybe it was just an ache for meaning. He began studying Stoic philosophy as a teenager, copying Epictetus's words by hand, a slave's wisdom engraved into a future emperor's mind. That contrast alone, imagine it, the most important man in the empire, learning how to let go of control. The boy who would command armies, studying how to surrender to fate. It's like teaching a lion to purr. Yet Marcus purred, softly, daily, sometimes with blood on his hands, sometimes with grief in his bones, because being emperor did not protect him from illness, from betrayal, from death, from the ordinary cruelty of being human. His reign was marked by chaos, plague, war, revolt, personal loss. He buried 8 of his 13 children. His health was frail, his days were long, and the pressure impossible. Yet he wrote, not to complain, but to remember. You have power over your mind, not outside events. Realize this, and you will find strength. These are not the words of a conqueror. They are the words of a man trying to hold himself together. No wonder psychologists today study his meditations. Viktor Frankl, survivor of Auschwitz, built an entire philosophy around a similar truth, that even in a concentration camp, one could choose how to suffer. Marcus said it first, the impediment to action advances action. What stands in the way becomes the way. That phrase feels modern, feels like a slogan, but it was born from pain, from exhaustion, from long nights facing the impossible. Marcus never intended his writings to be published. That's why they feel raw, messy, repetitive. Sometimes he scolds himself. Sometimes he praises stillness. Sometimes he just tries to stay sane. He repeats ideas like mantras because he needed them. Because power, contrary to what we think, doesn't make life easier. It makes clarity harder, the noise louder, the temptations greater, the betrayals closer. And in that storm, Marcus looked inward, again and again. He called it the inner citadel, a place in the soul no one could invade. No army, no flattery, no fear. And it wasn't just theory, he practiced. He let enemies live, he forgave betrayal, he resisted luxury. His robes were simple, his meals plain, his palace full of philosophers, his rule marked by dignity, not spectacle. And yet people barely remember him, at least not like they remember Caesar, or Nero, or Alexander, perhaps because he did not seek to be remembered. Fame is a vapor, he wrote. Look at the emptiness of those who seek it. He knew time would erase him, and strangely that comforted him, because it freed him to live rightly, not loudly. There's something eerie about that, something quiet and sad and noble. The man who could command legions chose instead to command himself. The man who could indulge every desire chose to write about virtue, alone, with no audience, just a wax tablet, a trembling hand, and thoughts that still echo. Marcus Aurelius didn't want to be emperor. He wanted to be good. That's who he was. And maybe, just maybe, that's why he still matters. Marcus Aurelius was born into a world that worshipped glory, statues, coins, parades, legacies carved into marble. Rome was obsessed with spectacle, with names etched in stone, with the kind of ambition that burns quietly under the skin. But Marcus didn't want glory. He wanted clarity. Even as a boy, he was strange, quiet, thoughtful, drawn to old books and silence. He slept on the floor, wore rough clothes, refused extravagance, not for performance, for practice. He believed comfort made the mind soft, that a future ruler should not be spoiled by the palace. He wasn't born to rule, but when Emperor Hadrian saw him, he saw something rare: humility, discipline, and something else, self-mastery. Marcus was adopted into the imperial line, groomed for power, surrounded by tutors and statesmen. But he never stopped reading Epictetus, a philosopher who had been born a slave, lame in one leg, beaten, forgotten, yet free in mind. This contrast haunted Marcus. He had everything, yet he studied those who had nothing. Perhaps because he sensed that power was a trap, that the crown could blind more than it could guide. He wrote, "It is possible to be happy even in a palace," as if he were trying to convince himself, because the palace was filled with danger, flattery, greed, manipulation. Marcus watched friends turn to rivals, watched wealth corrode character, watched the Senate turn cowardly when truth was needed. He knew the sickness of Rome wasn't outside, it was inside: pride, vanity, endless craving. So he practiced abstaining from praise, from excess, from illusion. He wrote, "Ask yourself at every moment, is this necessary?" That question guided him, stripped away noise, protected his mind from drifting. He didn't want to be seen, he wanted to be good. But how does one remain good in a world that rewards charm over truth, that celebrates conquest over conscience, that forgets everything except spectacle? Marcus's answer was solitude, not isolation, inner solitude, a constant return to the soul. He wrote to himself like a therapist, like a priest, like a man talking himself down from the ledge of temptation. His notes weren't grand, they were reminders. Don't be overheard complaining, even to yourself. Death smiles at us all. All we can do is smile back. These weren't poems, they were tools, anchors, for a boy growing into a man who would one day carry an empire. And that empire was bleeding. Plagues, invasions, political rot. The golden age was over, and Marcus knew it. He wasn't trying to restore Rome's glory. He was trying to preserve its soul, at least for a little while, at least until he could pass on the flame. But fate is cruel, and his son, Commodus, would later burn it all down. That irony, so sharp, the philosopher emperor, the calm fire, followed by madness, by ego, by vanity unchained. History often plays that way. The wise pass the torch, and the fools light the curtains. But Marcus didn't know that yet. As a young man, he still believed in preparation, in duty, in moral training. He believed a soul could be shaped like marble, chiseled by choice, smoothed by suffering. He welcomed both, refused comfort, pursued virtue, and in doing so, became a strange kind of royalty. The kind who would rather write than speak. The kind who would rather lose with dignity than win by deceit. The kind who did not want glory, but got it anyway. Because sometimes when a soul is quiet enough, history listens. Power is loud, it commands, it consumes, it takes up space. But Marcus Aurelius ruled quietly. Not from a marble throne surrounded by senators, but often from a weather-worn tent on the edges of empire, deep in the mud and frost of the northern frontier. He didn't want to be there. He wanted books. He wanted solitude. But Rome was unraveling, and the emperor could not hide. Germanic tribes were pressing against the borders. Disease was devouring the cities, and the empire, bloated and tired, groaned under its own weight. So Marcus left comfort behind, traded silk for wool, marble for canvas. He led his armies not with fire, but with presence, with steadiness, with a gaze that saw through panic. The soldiers respected him, not because he was brutal, but because he was with them, sharing the cold, sharing the hunger, writing quietly while others slept. His meditations were mostly written here, in the mud, in the smoke, in the eerie stillness between battles. He never titled them, never arranged them, just thoughts, caught in the dark, about death, about ego, about how to stay calm when everything is falling apart. That contrast, it's almost mythic. The emperor in a war tent, scribbling reminders to himself, you could leave life right now. Let that determine what you do. Most rulers surrounded themselves with flatterers. Marcus surrounded himself with reminders of mortality, of virtue, of smallness. The Roman army didn't just fight enemies, it fought plague. Entire legions were wiped out by the Antonine plague. Some scholars think it was smallpox, others say measles. Either way, it was devastating. And Marcus was there, not fleeing to villas, not sending generals, but present, watching the empire rot from within while enemies pressed from without. He could have lost himself. Many emperors did. But Marcus held to philosophy, not as escape, as shield, as compass. If it is endurable, he wrote, then endure it. If it is not, then stop complaining. These are not the words of a man detached from pain. They are the words of someone neck deep in it, choosing not to drown. Psychologists today would call this radical acceptance. The art of meeting reality as it is, not as we wish it to be. Viktor Frankl practiced it in the camps. Jung described it as integration. Marcus practiced it with every breath. He knew that fear multiplies when resisted, that pain grows teeth when avoided. So he met it, calmly, intimately, and wrote it down. That's why the meditations still echo. They were not written to impress. They were written to survive. And survival, for Marcus, meant staying human in a world that was turning feral. The war dragged on for years. Supplies dwindled, soldiers lost hope, and still he wrote about justice, about duty, about the shortness of life. Do not act as if you had 10,000 years to live. That line, written in a tent under siege in the freezing dark. It's not advice, it's a plea to himself, to us, to stop waiting, to start living rightly, even now, especially now, because the world will not pause for us to prepare, and neither did Rome. The chaos continued, but so did Marcus, not because he wanted to, but because he believed in something stronger than desire. Duty, virtue, that old Roman word, virtues, manliness, yes, but also strength of soul, moral force. Marcus didn't scream it, he lived it, quietly. From a tent, in the dirt, with death all around him, and a pen in his hand, Marcus Aurelius lost more than most men survive. As emperor, as a father, as a husband, he watched life unravel in slow, deliberate silence. 13 children, only 5 lived beyond childhood. Imagine that, naming them, holding them, dreaming for them, and then burying them one by one. Little hands, quiet rooms, toys never touched again. He didn't speak of it often, but the grief seeps through his meditations like smoke. You have embarked, you have made the voyage, you are come to shore. Get out. That's how he talked about death, not with fear, but with surrender, with the kind of tired wisdom that only comes from watching too much beauty vanish. His beloved wife, Faustina, died after 30 years of marriage. He never remarried, never complained. He only wrote to himself, what does not make a man worse than he was, also does not make his life worse. That sentence, calm and cutting, a reminder that pain is not poison unless we drink it. The Stoics believed grief was natural, but lingering in it was a choice. They did not avoid tears, but they questioned the mind that clung to them. Is this useful? Is this necessary? Marcus had no illusions. Death was not a punishment. It was part of the pattern. A leaf falling, a breath ending. A torch passed, and he refused to waste time resenting the wind. But he felt it, deeply and quietly. There's a line where he tells himself, do not imagine things being done for your benefit. In other words, don't expect the universe to cater to you. It won't. He watched plague decimate the cities, watched friends turn on him, watched his own body weaken, pain in the chest, trembling in the limbs. He kept working, kept writing, not because he was numb, but because he believed meaning wasn't found in comfort. It was made in suffering. Viktor Frankl echoed this centuries later. If there is a meaning in life at all, he wrote, then there must be a meaning in suffering. Marcus would have nodded. He had no gods to cry to, no belief in reward after death, only this world, this brief spark, and the choice to live rightly within it. That is what grief taught him, that nothing belongs to us. Not our bodies, not our children, not even our thoughts. Everything is borrowed, and everything returns. So cling to nothing, not in coldness, but in reverence. Let each moment be sacred precisely because it will not last. That is the paradox. The more we accept death, the more alive we become. Marcus did not run from this truth. He walked straight into it, eyes open, heart broken, still breathing, still kind, still sane. That's what made him different, not power, not words, but the way he carried loss without losing himself. The way he wrote in the dark, not for us, for him, to remember who he was, to stay whole. That journal was his lantern, and somehow, through centuries, through ash and ruin, it still glows. Praise is a soft poison, sweet on the tongue, bitter in the blood. It flatters the ego, but weakens the soul. Marcus Aurelius understood this early. He lived in a palace of mirrors, where every reflection smiled, every voice flattered, every gesture bowed. People called him divine, said he was the embodiment of wisdom, of justice, of Rome itself. But Marcus wasn't fooled. He wrote again and again, "Do not be made into a Caesar." He feared becoming the image, becoming the title, becoming the mask others handed him, because he knew how easy it was to believe it, how easy to let admiration rot into vanity. He watched it happen to others, senators puffed up with empty applause, generals who mistook fear for respect, rulers who fell in love with their own portraits. Praise, Marcus knew, doesn't reflect who we are. It reflects what others want from us. And if we chase it, we become actors, performing, bending, losing the thread. The Stoics taught that the only praise worth seeking comes from within. A clear conscience, a steady soul, a life lived rightly, even when no one is watching, especially then. Marcus warned himself not to value reputation over integrity, not to let fame define goodness. He reminded himself that the opinions of others, whether glowing or cruel, changed nothing about what is true. That was his shield. Because as much as he was praised, he was also criticized. Plots formed behind curtains. Scribes whispered doubts. Senators mocked his philosophical leanings. Some said he was too soft, too pensive, too slow to punish. And still he did not react. He wrote, "Ambition means tying your well-being to what other people say or do. Sanity means tying it to your own actions." That line cuts because most of us are ambitious, not for power, but for approval, for likes, for applause, for being seen, validated, known. But Marcus warns, if peace depends on public opinion, it will crumble. Because opinion shifts like wind, and the crowd is not wise. It is reactive, shallow, loud. Nietzsche, centuries later, would echo this. He called the herd dangerous, said that true freedom required standing alone. That mediocrity is always threatened by depth. Marcus lived this. He chose obscurity over performance. He avoided attention, walked softly. He knew the temptation. He felt it, and he said no. Not once, every day. That's what makes his philosophy powerful. It wasn't abstract, it was a fight. Praise tempted him daily, and he resisted, with scribbled lines, with inner arguments, with silence. Let them talk, he wrote. Let them misunderstand. The only judge he feared was himself, and not even fear, discipline, because self-respect is not ego. It is alignment between what we do and what we know is right. Most people live out of sync, smiling while resenting, speaking while doubting, performing while hollow. Marcus refused. even when it cost him favour, even when it left him alone. He wasn't chasing love, he was chasing virtue, and virtue is often invisible. It doesn't get applause, it doesn't trend, but it lasts, it settles the mind, it guards the soul, and it doesn't need to be seen to be real. That's the irony. Praise fades, but principle remains, and Marcus chose the latter, quietly, repeatedly, until even his silence began to speak. Desire seems harmless, a passing thought, a small ache, a wish for more. But the Stoics saw it differently. They saw desire as a cage, the kind made of gold, invisible, comfortable, but still a cage. Marcus Aurelius warned himself again and again, don't chase what you don't need. Don't let craving dictate your movements. You see how few things you need to live a happy life, he wrote. Such a life is within your reach. That sentence wasn't a platitude, it was a map, because Rome was full of distraction. Feasts, sex, wealth, status, all wrapped in ritual and pride. Every corner of power offered indulgence, and every indulgence promised something false, satisfaction. But Marcus had seen too many men grow sick on abundance. He saw desire not as pleasure, but as dependency. The moment the mind says, I need this to be happy, it gives away its freedom. That's the trade. Desire doesn't just want, it demands. It whispers more, then it whispers again. Then it screams, and most obey. They chase the new thing, the better feeling, the softer pillow, the brighter stage. But Marcus paused, asked, is this necessary? That question disarms desire. It removes the illusion of urgency. It brings the mind back to breath, to simplicity, to what actually matters. Viktor Frankl once said that between stimulus and response there is a space, and in that space is our power. The Stoics lived in that space. Desire rushes, virtue waits. Most people live in hunger. Not for food, but for control, for reassurance, for love that cannot be lost, for power that never ends. But these things do not exist, and Marcus knew it. He wrote, it is crazy to want what is impossible, and it is impossible to escape the fate of wanting nothing ever to happen to you. Desire resists life. It tries to script it, it clings. And when life does what life always does, change, desire turns to suffering. The Buddha said the same. That craving is the root of suffering. That peace comes not from getting, but from letting go. Marcus was not Buddhist, but he lived the insight. He watched friends destroy themselves over greed, watched senators trade dignity for advantage, watched lovers cling until they drowned. He saw how desire makes people desperate, how it blinds, how it hollows. So he practiced resistance, not with force, with clarity. He trained the mind to need less, to want less, to notice the tricks of advertising, praise, jealousy. He knew luxury doesn't bring peace. It only raises the stakes, makes people afraid to lose what they never needed. If you seek tranquility, he wrote, do less. And again, limit yourself to what is essential. These weren't commandments, they were whispers, notes to a soul trying to stay light, trying to stay sane in a world drunk on wanting. The irony is, once desire loosens, joy appears, not grand joy, not fireworks, a quiet joy, the joy of walking without chains, of eating simply, of being alive without needing more than this breath. Marcus felt that, and he protected it, not with walls, with wisdom. Desire is loud, wisdom is still. He chose stillness. Most people believe their thoughts. They treat them like facts, like trusted friends. But Marcus Aurelius didn't. He treated his thoughts like wild animals. They had to be observed, questioned, tamed, because he knew a single idea could ruin a day, a year, a life, not because it was true, but because it felt true. He wrote, "The soul becomes dyed with the colour of its thoughts." That line is quiet but dangerous, because it means the mind doesn't just think, it transforms. It becomes what it repeats. If you dwell in fear, you become fearful. If you dwell in resentment, you become bitter. If you dwell in emptiness, you become hollow. Thoughts are not neutral, they are paints, and most people are painting without looking. So Marcus looked closely, constantly. He would examine his thoughts as if examining an injury. Where did this come from? Is it mine? Is it helping? He did not trust the first reaction. The first instinct. He knew the mind is full of noise, of ego, of stories told by fear and desire. You have power over your mind, he reminded himself, not outside events. It seems simple, but it's everything. Because most people try to change the world, to fix everything out there. But Marcus turned inward. He studied his assumptions, questioned his conclusions. He knew that life was shaped not by what happens, but by how we interpret what happens. This isn't optimism, it's sovereignty, the power to choose the lens, to rewrite the meaning. And that power, if not practiced, fades. So he practiced. When insulted, he asked, "Is this really harm?" When afraid, he asked, "What exactly am I fearing?" When angry, he paused, dug underneath, always asking, "What belief is causing this?" Because emotion is smoke, belief is fire. And Marcus was a fire watcher. He didn't extinguish every flame, but he understood them, he sat with them, and that made him unshakable. Because if the mind can be trained to see clearly, nothing can enslave it. Not praise, not pain, not panic. Stoicism, at its heart, is cognitive therapy. 2,000 years before the term existed. Aaron Beck and Albert Ellis, founders of cognitive behavioral therapy, built entire systems around this idea, that thoughts create emotion, that distorted thinking creates distorted lives. Marcus was already there, with a wax tablet, in a battlefield tent, teaching himself how not to be consumed. Because the emperor had thoughts like anyone else, ugly ones, scared ones, vindictive ones, but he didn't obey them, he studied them. That's the discipline, not controlling the world, controlling the story, and the story always begins in the mind. So he kept writing, not to entertain, to inspect. He peeled back every thought, named it, tamed it, until the mind became clear water, still, reflective, unclouded by lies. That's why he seemed so calm. It wasn't temperament, it was training. And the training never ended, because the thoughts never stopped, so neither did he. And neither should we. Power is not light, it is not glamorous, it is not what the movies show. Power is heavy, it isolates, it corrupts, it sharpens the air with pressure. Marcus Aurelius carried the weight of the world, and he knew it. Not as privilege, as burden. He once wrote, "It is in your power to withdraw into yourself whenever you want." A strange thing for the most powerful man in the world to say. But he wasn't speaking of escape. He was speaking of refuge. Because the throne is a prison disguised as a pedestal. People don't tell you the truth. They perform. They manipulate. They flatter. The higher you rise, the less you're seen. You become a role, a symbol, a mask, and the loneliness grows teeth. Marcus felt it deeply. He didn't trust the gold that came with power. He saw how easily it blinded, made people arrogant, fragile, cruel. So he did the opposite. He simplified. His clothes were plain, his meals quiet. He walked slowly, spoke softly, avoided spectacle. Not because he was trying to impress, because he was trying to stay sane. He knew that power makes people forget. Forget humility. Forget mortality. Forget truth. So he reminded himself every day, "You are a soul carrying a corpse." That wasn't cynicism. It was balance, a way to keep the crown from reaching his mind. He ruled millions, but he never ruled for himself. He didn't chase war, didn't expand the empire. He governed out of duty, not hunger. Even his enemies respected him, because he didn't posture, didn't overreach, didn't crush for sport. He governed as a servant, as a student of virtue, and when he failed, he admitted it, quietly, to himself, in ink. Power did not make him immune to error. It made him more careful, because every choice rippled through thousands of lives. Every delay, every indulgence, every misjudgment carried consequences. He carried them, without blame, without vanity. That's what makes him rare. Most rulers worship their own image. Marcus tried to erase his, tried to be invisible, so the decisions could be clear, so the soul could stay clean. In a world that feeds the ego, he fasted. In a world that shouted, he whispered. In a world that takes, he reflected. Power didn't change him, it revealed him. The quiet strength, the soft fire, the stillness under pressure. Even now, psychologists study power's effects. Daché Keltner found that power reduces empathy, that it disconnects people from others' feelings. Marcus resisted this, with philosophy, with self-examination, with reminders that he was mortal, that he could die any moment, that his only real power was over his own mind. Everything else was borrowed, was fragile, was fading. He held it all loosely, ruled with open hands. And when the time came to die, he didn't cling. He let go. With the same grace he carried every burden. That is true power. Not dominance, but dignity. Not control, but clarity. Not legacy, but presence. A presence that still lingers. There are moments in life when nothing happens. No war, no crisis, no visible change. Just silence. For most, these moments feel boring, empty. But to Marcus Aurelius, they were sacred. He saw stillness not as absence, but as space. Space to think, to return, to observe the self. Nowhere, he wrote, can man find a quieter or more untroubled retreat than in his own soul. He did not say this lightly. He had seen war, had buried children, had ruled an empire. But even in peace, the real battle continued. Inside the mind, restlessness, regret, desire, noise. The world doesn't always need fire to burn a soul. Sometimes it just needs distraction. Marcus feared that more than pain, because distraction numbs slowly, softens the soul, turns people into ghosts of themselves. That's why he practiced stillness. Not as meditation, as maintenance, a return to center, a sharpening of the blade. Every morning, he wrote to himself. Not for the world, not to teach, to clean the mind, like dusting a mirror, so that truth could reflect, even for a moment. Stillness was his workshop, his shelter, his forge, where he confronted his flaws, where he trained his perception, where he reminded himself of what mattered and what didn't. He asked simple questions. What do I control? What am I avoiding? What am I chasing that cannot satisfy? These weren't rhetorical, they were necessary, because the emperor couldn't afford delusion, couldn't afford to be ruled by ego, and neither can we. In a world of noise, stillness becomes rebellion. Everyone is scrolling, rushing, performing. But Marcus stopped. He slowed the breath, watched the thought, questioned the impulse, and found peace not by escaping, but by accepting. Jung said, "Who looks outside dreams, who looks inside awakens." Marcus looked inside, every day, not to escape the world, to meet it more clearly, to become unshakable, not by resisting change, but by understanding it. Everything changes, even peace. The storms always return. The mind must be ready, must be anchored. And anchors are built in silence, not in distraction, not in comfort, in stillness, in staring into the void and not flinching, in asking the hard questions when no one else is listening. Marcus practiced that. So when chaos came, he didn't panic. When insult came, he didn't react. When death approached, he didn't beg. He had already sat with these truths, held their weight, and grown strong under it. That's what made him a philosopher, not just a ruler. Not what he wrote, but how he lived, how he used quiet not to hide, but to see, to prepare, to clean the soul. That's what stillness offers, not escape, but strength. And Marcus knew, strength born in silence lasts longer than strength born in fury, because the storm always ends, but the soul, if well tended, remains. Marcus Aurelius woke every day, knowing he might not live to see the night. not as a poet, not as a pessimist, as a realist. "You could leave life right now," he wrote. "Let that determine what you do and say and think." That idea, it doesn't scream, it whispers, and it changes everything. Most people avoid death. They distract, deny, delay. But Marcus didn't. He made death his mirror, held it up to his ambition, to his anger, to his desires, and asked, "Does this still matter, knowing I'll die?" Most things did not. He wasn't obsessed with death. He was liberated by it, because mortality removes illusion. It peels away the theatre of importance, the trophies, the grudges, the endless climbing. When we remember we're dying, what doesn't matter falls away, and what does shines. That's why he kept it close, not to grieve, to clarify. Death made him better, kinder, more patient, more honest. He knew every encounter might be the last, every conversation, a final word. Every morning, a gift he hadn't earned, so he paid attention to breath, to beauty, to people, even those who hated him. Soon you will be dead, he reminded himself, and soon they will be dead, and soon the very memory of everything will be erased. That's not morbid, it's humbling. It ends the game of superiority, of self-righteousness. It returns us to the ground, to humility, to urgency. He didn't postpone love, didn't delay truth, didn't expect tomorrow, and yet he worked tirelessly, governed with care, wrote with devotion, because knowing life is brief doesn't make it meaningless, it makes it sacred, like a flame in the dark, fragile, precious, glowing just long enough to warm one room. He wasn't the first to see it this way. The Egyptians meditated in tombs. The samurai slept with death beside them. Even modern psychologists note that contemplating mortality increases gratitude, reduces pettiness, sharpens values. Ernest Becker called it the denial of death, said that most human behaviour, ambition, hate, addiction, is just a mask for fear of dying. Marcus pulled the mask off, looked death in the eyes, not defiantly, respectfully, and said, "Yes, I see you, and because of you, I will not waste this day." He didn't fear dying. He feared not living rightly, not using the breath while he had it, not becoming what he could become. That's the mirror. That's the pressure, and also the gift, because once we see death, not as enemy, but as teacher, we live differently. We argue less, we pause more, we notice, we forgive, we create, we love without clinging. Marcus didn't write poems about this. He wrote truths, cold, clear, transforming, and in doing so, he built a life worth remembering. Not because it lasted, but because it was lived with eyes open. Marcus Aurelius lived for virtue, but he died with a failure. His son, Commodus, a man who would undo almost everything Marcus tried to preserve. Historians still wonder, how could the philosopher emperor raise a tyrant? A man drunk on power, addicted to spectacle, obsessed with being loved, feared, worshipped. Commodus wore lion skins, fought in the arena, renamed Rome after himself. He saw himself not as a servant of the people, but as a god. And the contrast is unbearable. Marcus, who lived simply, died simply. Commodus, who inherited wisdom, chose chaos. The irony burns. Marcus wrote about the soul. Commodus performed for crowds. Marcus ruled with restraint. Commodus ruled with ego. Marcus sought truth. Commodus lived in fantasy. How does that happen? How does a flame pass into smoke? Some say Marcus made a mistake, that he should have appointed a successor from the Senate. That blood blinded him. That fatherhood softened his logic. Maybe, or maybe it proves something harder to swallow, that even the best minds cannot control outcomes. That virtue is not always hereditary. That legacy, like everything, is vulnerable. Marcus may have believed too much in the power of example, thought that if he lived rightly, his son would follow. But imitation is not transmission. Commodus didn't want philosophy. He wanted applause. And Rome tired and hungry for entertainment, gave it to him. The empire slipped into cruelty. The Senate was humiliated. Gold was wasted. Enemies crept closer. Commodus ruled not as a steward, but as a child with a crown. It must have haunted Marcus even in death, to know the world he tried to stabilize was left in hands that would fracture it. But perhaps he knew. Perhaps that's why he wrote so often about impermanence, about letting go, about the futility of controlling others. He never claimed to save Rome, only to govern well while he could. And that humility, that realism, is the quiet backbone of Stoicism. You do your part. You train your mind, you serve your moment, but you release the rest. You don't own the future. Even Marcus, with all his clarity, couldn't shape it. He could only write, only live. And even that would be misread, misused, ignored. The meditations nearly vanished, found centuries later, scattered, untitled, scribbled in the margins of history. That too is legacy. Not marble, not statues, just a voice in the dark, surviving because it still says something true. Marcus failed to raise a virtuous ruler, but he succeeded in showing us what virtue looks like in the face of failure. And maybe that's the deeper gift. Marcus Aurelius never saw himself as special, not chosen, not holy, not destined, just a man. A soul in a body that ached, a mind that wandered. He once wrote, "Soon you will have forgotten everything. Soon everything will have forgotten you." That sounds bleak, but it freed him. Because if no one is remembered, then all that matters is how we live now. Not what they say, not what they write, but who we are when no one is watching. That's why he called himself a student, always learning, always adjusting. He didn't see leadership as dominion, but as duty. The same way a doctor does not seek applause, but to heal. The same way a gardener does not own the tree, but tends it. Marcus tended Rome like that, not perfectly, but earnestly. He didn't chase expansion, he chased justice, didn't crave honor, craved honesty, and it showed. In his laws, in his letters, in the way he questioned himself more than he questioned others. The Senate often wanted spectacle, revenge, displays of dominance. Marcus preferred mercy. He pardoned enemies, resisted cruelty. Even in war, he sought peace, not because he was weak, because he knew power isn't shown through fury, but through restraint. That's what made him dangerous, not his armies, but his calm, his unshakable presence, his refusal to be baited by drama. The Stoics taught that character is forged in difficulty. Marcus agreed. He called obstacles fuel for the fire, not something to avoid, something to use. And every day, as emperor, gave him more to burn. Politics, illness, betrayal, death. And yet he remained kind, humble, grounded, the warrior without pride, the emperor without ego. Nietzsche spoke of the Übermensch, the one who transcends. Marcus didn't transcend, he integrated. He held the contradictions without collapsing. Ruler and student, power and humility, grief and gratitude. He carried the weight and still bowed to life, quietly, repeatedly. His humility wasn't passive, it was earned, like calluses, like scars. It came from seeing clearly, knowing how little we control, how brief our reign, how foolish our cravings. Humility, for Marcus, was not modesty. It was alignment, a soul in harmony with reality. And reality, he knew, does not revolve around us. We are not the sun, we are flickers, visitors, carriers of a torch we did not light. That truth didn't make him bitter. It made him gentle, strong, still. The kind of strength that doesn't need applause. That doesn't break when ignored. That simply endures until the fire goes out. Marcus Aurelius never meant for his words to be read. The meditations were not written for an audience. They were written for survival, for self-correction, for sanity. Imagine him now, an old man by firelight, armies camped nearby, ink staining his fingers. He writes slowly, carefully, not to impress, to remember, to hold on to something solid in a world that constantly slips away. The journal was his mirror, a place to speak honestly, brutally, softly, to ask questions others feared, to admit weakness, to rehearse virtue. He didn't polish his sentences, he whispered them, to himself. When you arise in the morning, he wrote, think of what a precious privilege it is to be alive. That sounds beautiful, but it wasn't poetry, it was armor, because every morning he faced war, faced plague, faced death, and still he chose gratitude, chose clarity, chose to start the day not with dread, but with discipline. He reminded himself, people will be rude, life will be unfair, pain will visit, and yet he must respond with integrity, again and again. That's what the journal was, not a story, a training ground, a mental gym. And the repetitions were not weights, but words, each phrase a representative, each line a breath. He didn't write to express emotion. He wrote to examine it, to question it, to strip away the lie, because emotions, he knew, are fast, but truth is slow. So he slowed down, took each feeling apart, asked, is this anger helpful? Is this fear based on fact? Is this desire worth the cost? It was mental housekeeping, daily and necessary, because the emperor was still a man, still tempted, still distracted, still at risk of becoming what he despised. The journal kept him close to the ground, to what mattered. It was where he wrote, waste no more time arguing what a good man should be. Be one. That line has echoed through centuries, not because it's clever, because it's clean. It cuts, it reminds. And that's all he wanted, to remember who he was, what he stood for, why it mattered. Not to the world, to himself. In a world obsessed with performance, he wrote in private. In a culture of statues and coins, he wrote on wax and papyrus, not to be remembered, but to stay real. And somehow in doing so, he outlasted them all, not as a conqueror, but as a witness to the mind, to the struggle, to the strange beauty of trying to be good, even when no one is watching. Marcus Aurelius listened to nature like it was a god, not a god of thunder or miracles, but of patterns, of rhythm, of quiet law. He believed everything followed a nature, each animal, each tree, each person, each star. And to live well was to live in harmony with that nature, not to dominate it, not to escape it, to align with it. Like a river flows, like the moon pulls tides. He watched ants work, leaves fall, wolves hunt. He saw no drama in it, no pride, no hesitation, just movement, just being. That's what he wanted for himself. Not glory, not fame, just to do what was his to do, fully, without flinching. What is your art, he asked. To be good. That was the standard. Not comparison, not approval, just natural alignment. And nature, he knew, does not waste. It does not rush. It does not panic. A tree doesn't grow by wanting. It grows by following the sun, by staying rooted. So he did the same. Returned to his roots, his breath, his reason. When overwhelmed, he looked at the stars, reminded himself how small he was, how short life is, how vast the sky. He found peace there, not because it solved anything, because it ended the illusion that anything needed solving. Nature doesn't need fixing, only understanding, and human nature, he believed, was not base, not evil, but rational, capable of virtue, capable of love, but only if trained, only if cleared of fog. That fog, he saw it everywhere, in pride, in fear, in endless wanting, in the belief that we are separate from the world, above it, immune to its laws. But we are not. We die like everything else, return to soil, to silence, and Marcus didn't fight that. He bowed to it, let it soften him, guide him, remind him that nature never lies. The body decays, the seasons turn, pain visits, joy flickers, nothing stays, and yet it is all enough, more than enough, if we pay attention, if we stop forcing, if we listen. That's what Marcus did. Listened, not to opinions, not to cravings, but to the quiet pulse of the universe, the breath beneath all things, and in that rhythm he found his own. The final days of Marcus Aurelius were quiet. There was no grand farewell, no parade, just a man, sick and fading, in a cold room in the city of Vindobona, modern-day Vienna. The empire still needed him. The frontiers were still tense. His son, Commodus, was not ready, but Marcus was tired. The kind of tired that doesn't sleep away. His body had been breaking for years, chest tight, breath shallow, fever burning behind the eyes, and still he worked, wrote, led, until even that was no longer possible. As death approached, he asked for no comfort, no flattery, just solitude, simplicity. He ate little, spoke less, let go, slowly, gently. He had spent his life preparing for this. Every morning, every entry, every loss was practice, and now the final moment arrived. Not as a thief, as a friend. He did not resist, he did not panic, he welcomed it, as nature, as justice, as release. He had given everything, had ruled without clinging, had suffered without bitterness, had written without pride, and now he died without fear. Some say his last words were to his guards, asking why they wept for him when the same fate awaited them. Others say he said nothing, just closed his eyes and left. Either way, it fits. No drama, no theatre, just the end of a sentence, a final exhale, a quiet return. His death was not the end of Stoicism, but it was the end of its golden light in Rome. After him came shadows. Commodus ruled with cruelty. The empire fractured. The journal disappeared. And yet somehow it survived, passed hand to hand. Monks, scholars, centuries of silence until it reached us. And now we read his thoughts not as history, but as mirror. A glimpse into a soul who tried, who failed, who forgave, who held on to virtue in a world of knives. That is his real legacy. Not statues, not wars, a notebook, full of questions, of reminders, of quiet strength. Marcus Aurelius was not born a sage, he became one. Through practice, through loss, through love, through silence. And in his final breath, that practice was complete. He had lived as he had written, simply, truthfully, with eyes open. And then, like a leaf in the wind, he was gone. But not lost. His words remain, a flicker in the dark, a compass for those still wandering. And maybe that's enough. Not immortality, but meaning, not glory, but grace, not noise, but the quiet echo of someone who lived well. The earlier tale rests now in stillness, its final words sinking into the quiet like stones, into deep water, leaving only the slow ripples of thought behind. The candle's flame sways gently, and in its light another journey begins, softer and wider, one that will drift through the great currents of philosophy, touching the ideas that have shaped the minds of centuries. No longer bound to one story, the mind will wander across 10 of the most enduring visions of wisdom, moving slowly so that each thought has time to settle like dust on an untouched shelf. Now let us speak of the first great idea, the Socratic method. It begins not with answers but with questions, small and deliberate, placed like stones on a path to see where they lead. Socrates believed that wisdom does not arrive in the fullness of knowing, but in the humility of realizing how little is truly known. He would meet his students, not with lectures, but with simple inquiries, peeling away layers of certainty to reveal the soft, uncertain core beneath. Each answer invited another question, and in this unending dance the mind was forced to see its own contradictions, to stand in the open where assumptions once sheltered it. It is a method that is less about arriving somewhere than about refining the traveller, stripping away false confidence, until only the essential remains. In the glow of this idea, one begins to feel the quiet power of conversation, not as a contest to win, but as a shared search where each voice is a lantern and the road ahead is always longer than it seems. Socrates himself left no writings, trusting instead in the living exchange between minds in the way a well-placed question can echo for years inside the heart. Even now, in the silence of this night, his method remains alive. For every honest question asked without the armour of certainty is a small act of Socratic courage, a way of stepping toward truth without claiming to possess it. And perhaps this is why his voice endures, not as the keeper of answers, but as the one who teaches how to walk in their direction. The candle leans, the air shifts, and somewhere in the darkness, the next great idea waits to be called forward. Now let us turn to the next great idea, Plato's theory of forms. Imagine a world beyond sight, untouched by time, where every shape, every truth, every beauty exists in its most perfect state. Plato believed that the reality we see is only a shadow of that higher realm, that the table in front of us is but an echo of the perfect tableness that exists beyond change, beyond decay. In this vision, the physical world is a mirror clouded by imperfection, and what we call knowledge is the act of remembering what the soul has already seen before birth. He spoke of a cave where people sit chained, watching shadows on a wall, believing them to be all there is, until one escapes into the light and sees the forms directly. The journey is not easy. The eyes ache in the brightness. The heart resists the unfamiliar, and yet once truth is glimpsed, the shadows lose their hold. In the forms lies the unchanging essence of things, the perfect circle that no hand can draw, the justice that no law can fully capture, the beauty that no face can forever keep. The senses, Plato warns, can deceive. They show us many chairs, each flawed, yet through thought we can approach the single, flawless form of chairness that makes them all possible. And so the philosopher's work is to look beyond appearances, to use reason as a bridge to that higher reality, to anchor the soul in what cannot fade. It is a comforting thought that somewhere there is a place where nothing breaks, nothing dies, nothing loses its shape, that all goodness and truth are preserved whole. But it is also a demanding thought, for it asks the mind to see the world not as an end, but as a clue, a path, a whisper of something greater. In this way, every ordinary thing becomes a signpost, every imperfect moment a reminder that perfection exists elsewhere, drawing us on. And perhaps in quiet moments like this, we can almost sense it, not with the eyes, but with the still part of the soul that recognizes what it once knew. The candle burns steadily, casting its own shadows on the wall, and one wonders which world this light belongs to, the one of change or the one of forms. Perhaps both. Perhaps every flicker is an invitation to turn toward the light. Now let us speak of Aristotle's virtue ethics, a vision of the good life not built on rigid rules or fleeting pleasures, but on the cultivation of character. Aristotle saw human life as a movement toward eudaimonia, a word often softened into happiness, but more deeply meaning human flourishing, the full flowering of one's nature. This is not a state one stumbles into by fortune, but a way of living shaped by countless choices, each one forming the habits that become the soul's architecture. Virtue, to Aristotle, is the balance between extremes, the golden mean between excess and deficiency. Courage lies between recklessness and cowardice. Generosity lies between wastefulness and stinginess. Honesty lies between boastfulness and self-deprecation. These are not mathematical midpoints, but living balances, different for each person, found through experience, reflection, and the slow refining of judgment. One becomes virtuous as one learns to play an instrument, not by reading notes alone, but by practice, by the feel of the strings, by mistakes that teach the hand where to rest. It is a philosophy that respects action, for knowing the good is not enough if one does not also do the good. And yet action must be guided by reason, for virtue is no accident. It is a harmony between thought and deed, where impulse is tempered by wisdom. In Aristotle's view, the virtuous person does the right thing not through struggle, but with a kind of ease as a skilled craftsman moves through his work with steady hands. Such ease is not born of laziness, but of long effort made natural. The world in this light is not a place to endure until some better life begins, but the very field in which the soul's excellence is cultivated. Every encounter, every challenge, every moment of choice is an opportunity to strengthen the fibre of one's being, and so the good life is not defined by wealth, power, or comfort, but by the steady accumulation of virtues, until the self stands as a well-built structure, able to weather the winds of fortune without collapse. In this way, happiness is not a prize, but the natural radiance of a well-shaped soul, a light that does not flicker with the passing of days. The candle's flame bends slightly in a whisper of unseen air, and one is reminded that balance, like virtue, is not stillness, but a constant adjustment, a living alignment with the good. Now let us turn to the thought of Descartes and the words that have echoed through centuries. Cogito ergo sum, I think therefore I am. It is a phrase born not from pride, but from doubt so deep it sought to strip away everything that could possibly be questioned, leaving only what could not be denied. Descartes imagined himself sweeping the mind clean of all assumption, pulling away the familiar scaffolding of belief until he stood alone in a vast space where nothing felt certain. Could the senses be trusted? They had deceived before. Could memories be trusted? They could be illusions. Could the body itself be trusted? Perhaps it was a dream, a trick, a fleeting projection. And yet, in the very act of doubting, one thing stood firm. There must be something that doubts. Thought itself became the bedrock, the one point that could not be faked or stolen. If thinking was happening, then something existed to do the thinking. This was not the end of his journey, but the first firm stone on which to build. From here, Descartes sought to rebuild the house of knowledge, brick by brick, each step tested for certainty. He wished for clarity as bright as geometry, truths so undeniable they could support all others. His method was deliberate, patient, as if sharpening a blade to cut away falsehood. And yet, there is something quietly human in the idea that the first certainty we can hold is the awareness of our own awareness, the strange fact that consciousness can turn inward and see itself. In the stillness of night, this feels less like a cold proof and more like a small ember glowing in the dark, a reminder that no matter how uncertain the world becomes, the flame of thought still burns. It is a solitary comfort, one that exists even when stripped of names, possessions, histories, even when all that remains is the bare knowing that we are here, now, thinking. Descartes' thought also whispers of the responsibility that comes with such certainty. If the self is known before all else, then it becomes the lens through which the world is built. A clear mind builds a clear life. A mind clouded with haste or fear builds a world that feels the same. To begin with, I think, is also to admit that the quality of thought matters, that the architecture of our inner world shapes the outer. The candle beside him might flicker, casting shifting shadows, but the fact of its light is undeniable. So too is the mind. Shadows may move across it, illusions may play on its surface, but the fact of its shining cannot be erased. In this way, cogito, ergo sum, is not a shout of triumph, but a steady breath in the silence, the quiet voice that remains when all other voices have been questioned away. It is the ground beneath the feet when the fog hides everything else, the one certainty from which all other certainties might grow. And perhaps, in the hours before sleep, when the body lies still and thought drifts, it is enough to hold this single truth without reaching for more, that in the act of thinking, of doubting, of wondering, there is existence, and in that existence there is the beginning of all understanding. Now let us move to Kant's categorical imperative, a moral compass not drawn from desire or consequence, but from duty itself, pure and unbending. Kant asked what it would mean to act in such a way that one's choices could be made into universal law, binding for all in all places, at all times. He sought a morality that stood above preference, stronger than impulse, untouched by the shifting tides of personal gain. Imagine pausing before each act to ask, if everyone did this, could the world still stand? If the answer is no, the act must be set aside, however tempting, however small. This is the first face of the imperative, a rule that turns the mirror outward to humanity as a whole, asking the self to see its choices not as private shadows, but as patterns in a greater weave. The second face is equally stern, yet equally luminous. Treat every person as an end in themselves, never merely as a means. In this, Kant draws a line against using others as tools for one's own purposes, however noble the excuse. Each person is a whole world, not a rung on a ladder, and to honour that is to honour the dignity of reason itself. The beauty of this thought lies in its symmetry, one's own freedom bound only by the freedom of all others, the moral law arising not from command, but from the structure of thought that all rational beings share. In Kant's view, morality is not a gift from heaven nor a contract with society, but something woven into the very capacity to reason, a truth that would shine even in a universe empty of gods. And yet, he admits, to follow it is no easy task. Desire pulls like wind, fear presses like weight, and the clarity of the imperative can feel cold against the warmth of inclination. But for Kant, it is in that cold clarity that moral worth is found. For to act rightly when it costs nothing is no great proof of virtue, but to act rightly against one's own advantage is the mark of a will aligned with the moral law. There is a certain quiet majesty in this view, the thought that even in the smallest decision one participates in a law as vast and impartial as the night sky, each act a star in a constellation too large for one life to see whole. The candle on the desk leans lower, its flame steady despite the draught, and one is reminded that light does not ask whether it is convenient to shine, it simply fulfills its nature. In this, Kant's imperative finds its living image, a steady flame guided not by whim or reward, but by the form of its own being. Now let us drift into Nietzsche's vision of the will to power, a force he saw not as the hunger for mere control over others, but as the deep, restless impulse within all living things to grow, to expand, to overcome the boundaries of what they are. For Nietzsche, life itself was a movement toward more life, a ceaseless reaching, like roots pressing through stone or rivers carving valleys over centuries. The will to power was not simply ambition, nor the shallow thirst for domination, but the inner current that drives the seed to become a tree, the artist to create beyond exhaustion, the thinker to break the limits of inherited truth. In his eyes, existence was not content to remain still. It surged forward in infinite forms, testing itself, reshaping itself, becoming more than it was. Even suffering could be part of this will, for struggle was not a mark of weakness, but a forge where strength was tempered. To embrace the will to power was to see life not as a series of obstacles, to endure until rest, but as a great arena in which one's being was sharpened through challenge, conflict, and creation. He warned against the life lived too safely, for in the shelter from hardship, the will could wither, becoming timid and pale. Better, he thought, to step into the storm and find in it the raw material from which to build oneself anew. It was this idea that fed his vision of the Übermensch, the one who creates their own values, standing beyond the dictates of the herd, shaping a self as an artist shapes stone, not with submission, but with the courage to carve. Such a life was not without cost. It demanded the abandonment of illusions that comfort but weaken, the acceptance that meaning is not given but made. Yet in this creation, the will to power finds its highest form, not in ruling over others, but in ruling over the self, in mastering the chaos within and turning it toward a work of art that is one's own existence. The night deepens as the thought settles, and one can feel in its quiet insistence the truth Nietzsche sensed, that even in stillness, the will stirs, like embers beneath ash, waiting for the breath that will bring them back into flame. Now let us turn to the idea of utilitarianism, the quiet yet weighty belief that the right action is the one that brings the greatest happiness to the greatest number. It is a thought that moves like a measuring hand over every choice, weighing pleasure against pain, joy against sorrow, as if morality itself could be shaped into a delicate balance. Jeremy Bentham spoke of it first in clear, almost mathematical terms, imagining each decision as a calculation, a sum of benefit and harm. John Stuart Mill refined it, reminding that not all pleasures are equal, that the delight of the mind and the depth of the heart stand above the fleeting gratifications of the body. In this way, the principle grows from mere arithmetic into a philosophy of care, one that asks not simply, "What do I want?" but "What will ease the burdens of all?" And yet, there is a softness in its ambition, for it does not dream of perfect worlds or flawless virtue, only of the steady increase of well-being, the lessening of needless suffering. In the quiet of night, such a thought has a certain tenderness, a recognition that life is already heavy and that the best we can do is to make it lighter where we can. But utilitarianism is not without its shadows. To weigh happiness is to sometimes choose between lives, to accept that what benefits the many may wound the few, and this calculation can cut deeply into the fabric of moral certainty. It demands a coolness of mind that can seem at odds with the warmth of compassion, and yet it is driven by compassion's root desire, that pain be less and joy be more. One might picture it as a lantern carried through a dark field, its light cast not just for the carrier, but for all who walk nearby. Each act becomes a ripple in a still pond, spreading outward in rings unseen, touching lives never met. To live by such a rule is to be always aware of these ripples, to choose with an eye not on the self alone, but on the widening circle of effect. In this way, the smallest kindness becomes great, and the smallest cruelty becomes grave. The candle's flame dips, sways, then steadies again, and one can almost feel in that fragile steadiness the essence of this thought, that the good is not a single blaze, but the gentle work of keeping the light burning for as many as it can reach. Now let us drift into the realm of existentialism, a philosophy that stands in the quiet space between the vast indifference of the universe and the fragile beating of a human heart. Kierkegaard spoke of the leap, the choice to believe or to act in the face of uncertainty, while Sartre declared that existence precedes essence, that we are not born with a fixed nature, but must carve our own from the raw stone of being. In this vision, there is no script, no eternal blueprint waiting to be discovered, only the open field of freedom, both exhilarating and heavy with the weight of responsibility. For to be free is also to be without excuse. Every choice, even the refusal to choose, shapes the meaning of one's life. Camus saw this clearly in the figure of Sisyphus, condemned to push the boulder without end, yet free to find joy in the act itself, to turn the burden into a form of defiance. In existentialism, the meaning of life is not given but made, shaped moment by moment in the furnace of decision. It is a philosophy that does not shy from the darkness. It asks us to stand within it and light our own small flame, knowing it may be the only one. This freedom can be dizzying, for the mind longs for certainty, for a map, for a guiding star that will not fade. Yet existentialism whispers that no such star is fixed, that we must chart the heavens ourselves, and that in doing so we become the cartographers of our own reality. Even despair in this light can be transformed, for when nothing is predetermined, every step becomes a declaration, every act a creation. The candle on the table burns without asking why. Its purpose is found in the burning itself. So too with life. Its meaning may be nothing more than the living of it, and yet in that simple truth lies a strange and unshakable dignity. To live without guarantees is to walk a path that is fully one's own, and in that ownership there is both solitude and strength. Perhaps this is why, in the quiet hours, existentialism feels less like a burden and more like a permission, the permission to be, to choose, to shape, and to stand as the sole author of one's fleeting but luminous story. Now let us move into the idea of the social contract, the quiet yet binding thread that weaves individuals into the fabric of a society. Hobbes spoke of a world before such a contract, a state of nature where life, though free, was solitary, poor, nasty, brutish, and short, where each lived by strength or cunning, and safety was a fragile dream. To escape this chaos, people, he said, surrendered certain freedoms, placing them in the hands of a sovereign power in exchange for order and protection. Locke's vision was gentler, imagining the contract as a guardian of life, liberty, and property, with the right to replace rulers who broke its trust. Rousseau heard another note entirely, speaking of the general will, the shared interest that rises above individual desires, the possibility of a collective self that acts not to oppress but to free. In each telling, the contract is not a paper in a drawer, but a living agreement, renewed in every act of cooperation, every law obeyed or challenged, every moment where self-interest bends toward the common good. It is unseen yet everywhere, shaping the streets we walk, the words we speak, the trust with which we open our doors at night. Without it, the world would return to the scattered silence of fear, where each step must be guarded and every stranger is a threat. Yet with it comes the weight of obligation, for to be part of a society is to bear the responsibility of maintaining its justice, to give as well as to take, to remember that rights are not solitary possessions, but shared inheritances. The candle burns lower, its light touching the edges of the room, and one feels in that circle the shape of the contract itself, an agreement to keep the flame alive so that all may see. But contracts, like flames, are delicate. They require care, they demand the tending of truth, the protection of fairness, the vigilance against those who would twist the common good to private ends. And so, to honour the social contract is not only to live within its safety, but to guard its spirit, to ensure that the promise made long ago in silence still holds in the lives of those who have never spoken it aloud. Now let us wander into the ancient current of the Tao, the Way, the quiet path spoken of in the old verses of Lao Tzu, a path not built but discovered, not forced but followed. The Tao is the rhythm beneath all rhythms, the flowing order that needs no command, the movement of clouds and rivers, the unfurling of leaves, the turning of the seasons, all in harmony, without hurry. To walk with the Tao is to let go of the restless urge to control, to see that the world shapes itself without the heavy hand of constant interference. The sages called this Wu Wei, effortless action. Not idleness, but the art of doing in a way that does not fight the current. It is the tree bending in the wind rather than breaking, the stream finding its way around stone without force. The Tao is not a destination, but the living present. Not a doctrine, but the quiet awareness that each moment holds its own completeness. It asks no oaths, no declarations, only the soft attentiveness that notices the pattern already unfolding. One who follows the Tao is like water, yielding yet unstoppable, clear yet deep, seeking the low places others avoid, nourishing without demanding. This way of being does not deny desire, but it does not cling to it. It does not refuse action, but it does not wrestle with it. In this light, ambition is not abandoned, but transformed, becoming less about climbing and more about flowing, less about conquest and more about harmony. The candle flickers with a small shift in the air, its flame swaying but not going out. A small lesson in the Tao itself: movement without loss, change without destruction. To understand the Tao is to see that control is an illusion, that the greatest strength often lies in yielding, that the world's deepest wisdom moves quietly, without announcement, shaping mountains and lives alike in its patient course. And so the way is always here, as near as the breath, as silent as the stars, waiting only for the stillness in which it can be heard. Now let us drift into David Hume's quiet yet unsettling thought, the problem of induction, a gentle unthreading of the trust we place in the patterns of the world. From childhood, we are taught to expect that the sun will rise tomorrow because it rose today, that bread will nourish because it always has, that dropped stones will fall because they always do. But Hume asked, how can we truly know this? We have seen these patterns repeat, yes, but repetition is not proof. We believe the future will mirror the past, not because of reason, but because of habit, a habit so deep it feels like certainty. We watch cause and effect as though they are bound together by necessity, yet what we actually see is only one thing following another, again and again, until the mind weaves its own invisible thread between them. We never witness the binding itself, only the sequence, only the rhythm. In this way, our confidence in tomorrow rests on an assumption we cannot prove, and yet cannot live without. Hume did not mean to strip the world of trust, but to show that our trust is a creature of the mind, not the logic of the universe. This thought can feel like standing at the edge of a vast plain at night, knowing the path forward is only lit by the small lantern of memory, and the rest is darkness we simply step into, believing the ground will still be there. The beauty of Hume's insight lies in its humility, for it reminds us that knowledge is not as solid as we wish it to be, that certainty is a quiet agreement between experience and expectation. Even the candle beside us burns with the same illusion. We expect it will keep burning in the next moment, but this is only because it has burned in the last. Perhaps it will, perhaps it won't, but our life moves forward as though it must. In this space between proof and habit, between knowledge and trust, Hume leaves us not with despair, but with the awareness that the mind's faith in the future is one of its most fragile and necessary acts. Now let us wander into the old and tempting vision of hedonism, the belief that pleasure is the highest good, that the measure of a life is found in the fullness of its delights. To the ancient Greeks, it was not a call to endless indulgence, but a search for the truest forms of happiness, the kind that endure rather than vanish in the aftertaste of excess. Epicurus spoke of it as the art of seeking pleasure wisely, of choosing those joys that do not bring pain in their shadow, of cultivating the simple satisfactions that need no wealth or conquest to sustain them. For him, bread and water could be a feast if taken with peace of mind, and friendship, quiet and deep, was a treasure greater than gold. In this light, pleasure was not the frantic grasping at sensation, but the gentle shaping of life, to avoid unnecessary suffering, to find contentment in what is near at hand. Yet hedonism holds a mirror to a truth many resist. That pain is the weight we seek to set down, and joy is the lightness we seek to carry. To follow this path is to learn the difference between what pleases in the moment and what nourishes across time, to see that the richest pleasures are often the softest ones, like the warmth of the sun on closed eyelids or the sound of rain against a window. But there is danger here too, for the pursuit of pleasure can so easily drift into a hunger that is never sated, a chasing of peaks that leaves one hollow between them. This is why the wiser hedonists speak of balance, of knowing when to stop, of savouring rather than consuming. The candle burns with a steady glow, giving its light freely but within the limits of its wax. It does not seek to burn faster, for that would be to end itself. So too with pleasure. When it is taken in measure, it sustains. When taken in greed, it destroys. Hedonism, at its truest, is the art of knowing the difference. Now let us move into the deep and endless question of determinism and free will, the tension between the chains of cause and the dream of choice. Determinism whispers that every action, every thought, every breath is the inevitable result of all that came before, that the universe is a vast, unbroken chain stretching backward to the first movement and forward to the last, each link forged by the one before it. In this view, the moment of decision is not a birth but an unfolding, like a seed opening because it must, like the tide rising because it is pulled. If the mind is shaped by genes, by upbringing, by the precise arrangement of atoms and events, then perhaps even the belief in freedom is simply another link in the chain. And yet, against this, the feeling of choice rises like a stubborn flame. The sense of standing at a crossroads, of being able to step left or right, to speak or remain silent, to act or to refrain. Free will insists that within the machinery there is a space, however small, where the self can push against the weight of what has been and make something new. Some see the two not as enemies but as different lights on the same river, that perhaps the current is fixed, yet the way one moves within it is one's own, that freedom may lie not in altering the flow, but in choosing how to meet it. Others suggest that even if all is determined, the experience of choosing is real enough to live by, for a life lived as if one is free is shaped differently than one lived in resignation. The candle on the table burns because the match was struck. The match was struck because the hand moved. The hand moved because of thoughts. The thoughts arose because of other moments, each leading to this small circle of light. Whether this flame was inevitable from the birth of the stars or lit by a free and sudden act may never be known. Perhaps it is in the mystery between these two that human life unfolds, a dance of necessity and possibility, where even if the steps are written, the dancer still moves with grace. Now let us step into the quiet puzzle of the ship of Theseus, an ancient question that drifts between the harbours of identity and change. The story is simple. A ship preserved in honour of a hero is kept seaworthy for centuries by replacing its parts as they decay. First a plank, then a mast, then the sails, until every single piece is new. And so the question arises, when all the original parts are gone, is it still the same ship? At first it feels like a trick of language, but the longer one lingers, the deeper it pulls. For if the ship is not the same, then at what moment did it cease to be itself? Was it when the first plank was replaced, or the last? And if it is the same, then what makes it so? The form, the function, the name, or something else entirely? The puzzle grows stranger still when one imagines the discarded pieces gathered and rebuilt into a ship identical to the original. Which then is the true ship of Theseus, the one with the unbroken history, or the one made of the original wood? The candle flame quivers slightly, and one realizes that the question is not only about ships but about people, for our bodies too are replaced piece by piece as the years turn, cells dying and being born, memories fading and shifting, beliefs evolving, faces changing. Yet we say without hesitation, I am still myself. Perhaps identity is not the matter from which we are made, but the continuity of the journey, the thread of experience and memory woven through time. Or perhaps we are, like the ship, something that both changes completely and remains somehow whole, our essence not fixed but a living thing, shaped and reshaped by the tides of existence. In this way, the ship of Theseus is less a riddle to be solved than a mirror, quietly reflecting the mystery of what it means to remain oneself while becoming someone new. Now let us rest within the strange and quiet terrain of absurdism, the recognition as Albert Camus saw it, that human beings are creatures who seek meaning in a universe that offers none in return. The mind yearns for clarity, for a grand design, for a purpose written in the stars, yet when it looks outward, it meets only silence, a vast and unbroken stillness. This is the absurd, not chaos, not hostility, but the endless tension between the hunger for meaning and the absence of it. Many, upon feeling this weight, rush to escape it, turning to faith, ideology, or distraction, anything to stitch a pattern into the blank cloth of existence. But Camus suggested another way, to face the absurd without flinching, to accept that life is without ultimate explanation, and yet to live it fully, intensely, as though the lack of meaning were not a prison, but a kind of freedom. In his image of Sisyphus pushing the stone, he saw not a figure crushed by futility, but one who, in embracing the endless task, finds his own victory. If there is no higher plan, then each moment becomes the canvas, and we, the painters of its fleeting colours. The candle's flame, which will inevitably burn down to nothing, still gives its light in this moment, and that light is enough. Absurdism asks not for resignation, but for defiance, not the bitter defiance of rage, but the quiet defiance of joy, the choice to smile in the face of the void. It whispers that life's worth is not hidden behind some distant curtain to be drawn back at the end, but here, in the very act of living, in the taste of water, in the warmth of a shared glance, in the sound of wind moving through leaves at night. And so, one learns to walk through the silence with open eyes, to push the stone with steady hands, knowing that the meaning one seeks may never come, and yet finding, in the seeking itself, something that feels like meaning after all. Now let us enter the shadowed depths of Plato's allegory of the cave, a vision of human understanding drawn in the soft charcoal of myth. Imagine a group of people who have lived their whole lives chained in darkness, their faces turned toward a wall, able to see only the flickering shadows cast by objects passing before a fire behind them. To these prisoners, the shadows are the only reality, the shapes the only truth, for they have never seen the objects themselves, nor the fire, nor the world beyond the cave. Then imagine that one prisoner is freed, pulled into the light, stumbling and blinded at first. For the truth is painful when the eyes have known only darkness. Slowly, shapes emerge. The fire, the path upward, and finally, beyond the cave, the vast and radiant world under the open sky. Trees, water, sunlight, stars. In that moment, the freed one understands that all they had believed was but a pale reflection of something greater. Yet the allegory does not end there, for the freed prisoner feels the pull to return, to descend again into the cave and tell the others of what lies beyond. But the others, unaccustomed to such talk, may not believe, may even resist, for the comfort of familiar shadows can feel safer than the blinding strangeness of truth. Plato's vision is not only about knowledge, but about the soul's journey from illusion to reality and the cost of awakening. For to see the light is also to know the darkness for what it is, and to live with the burden of both. The candle on the table flickers, casting soft shadows on the wall, and one can feel the cave in them, the way perception can be bound by what the senses allow, the way truth often waits beyond the frame of sight. The allegory whispers that each life is a kind of cave, and that to seek wisdom is to climb toward the light, even if the ascent is slow, even if the sun's brightness brings tears, even if the ones left below cannot follow. Now let us move into the still centre of Aristotle's golden mean, the gentle balance he saw as the heart of virtue, the narrow path between the cliffs of excess and deficiency. For Aristotle, every virtue is a midpoint, not an exact line drawn in stone, but a living balance that shifts with circumstance and person. Courage lies between cowardice and recklessness, generosity between miserliness and waste, humility between arrogance and self-abasement. It is not the avoidance of extremes for their own sake, but the seeking of the place where equality is at its most fitting, most human, most whole. This balance is not static, for life moves, and with it the measure of the mean. What is courage in one moment may be recklessness in another. What is restraint today may be cowardice tomorrow. The golden mean asks for a constant listening, a steady attunement to the harmony of the situation, as a musician adjusts each note to the flow of the music. In this way, virtue becomes less a rigid rule and more a craft, something shaped with patience and care, a skill honed in the quiet decisions that fill the days. Yet to live in balance is not to live without passion. Aristotle did not call for the dull flattening of all feeling, but for the full flowering of what is good in its right place and measure. The candle burns at such a mean. Too small a flame, and it will fade into darkness. Too large, and it will consume itself. But here it glows steadily, giving light and warmth without waste. The golden mean is a reminder that wisdom often lives, not in the loud gesture or the final extreme, but in the quiet middle, where the forces of life meet and steady each other. And so, to walk in virtue is to walk that narrow yet shifting road, feeling the weight of each step, listening for the place where one stands in harmony with both the self and the world. Now let us drift into the quiet logic of the principle of sufficient reason, the thought that nothing exists without a reason why it is so and not otherwise. Leibniz shaped it into a guiding light for the mind, a soft but unyielding demand that every fact, every event, every shadow and star carries within it the thread of its own explanation. To accept this principle is to believe that the world is not scattered chaos, but an ordered tapestry, each stitch bound to the next by the necessity, of course, the inevitability of reason. Yet this is not only a law for the scientist or the philosopher, it is the silent pull that makes a child ask why again and again, the impulse to peer behind the curtain of the obvious, to lift the stone and see what lives beneath. It whispers that no leaf falls without a cause, no thought rises in the mind without its roots, no flame burns without the marriage of air and spark. The candle before us is here because the wax was shaped, the wick was set, the match was struck. The air allowed it to live, each step a reason, each reason part of a longer chain that winds back beyond sight. But the principle carries its own shadows, for if everything must have a reason, then what reason is there for the whole of existence itself? What stands at the end of the chain, giving reason to all, yet needing none? Leibniz answered with the idea of a necessary being, something whose reason for existing lies in its own nature, something that simply is. Others see in this the limits of reason itself, a place where the mind meets the horizon and can go no further. Still, the principle remains a lantern in the dark, guiding thought through the tangled forest of causes, reminding us that to understand is to search for the thread that binds each moment to another, even if in the end that thread disappears into the silence from which all things come. Now let us sink into the shadowed waters of nihilism, the unsettling recognition that life may hold no inherent meaning, no ultimate purpose written into its fabric. The word carries the chill of emptiness, yet its roots lie not in the desire to destroy, but in the willingness to strip away illusions, to stand before the world without the shelter of comforting fictions. Nietzsche spoke of it as both a danger and a beginning. For when the old beliefs crumble, when the foundations that once seemed eternal turn to dust, a vast space opens. Some see in that space only despair, a void into which all values collapse, a darkness in which the self drifts without anchor. Yet others find in it a strange liberation, the freedom to shape meaning rather than receive it, to become the author rather than the subject of life's story. Nihilism does not erase the sun or silence the wind. It changes only the frame in which they're seen. The candle's flame still burns, though it owes its light to nothing beyond itself, and in that self-contained glow, there is a quiet beauty. To live without inherent meaning is not to live without value. It is to understand that value is made, not found, woven from choice, from love, from the small acts of creation that give colour to the days. The danger comes when the void is mistaken for an end rather than a beginning, when the absence of given purpose is read as the absence of all purpose. But for those who can bear the weight of it, nihilism becomes not a sentence, but a horizon, a wide and open space where the individual stands in the stillness and begins to speak meaning into the silence. It is a call to live, not because life is guaranteed to matter, but because it can be made to matter, and in that making lies a kind of quiet triumph. Now let us step into the looping corridor of Nietzsche's eternal recurrence, the thought experiment that bends time into a circle and asks the soul to dwell within it. Imagine that one night, in the stillness of solitude, a voice comes to whisper that every moment of life, every breath, every joy and sorrow will return to you again and again, not once, not twice, but endlessly, exactly as it has unfolded before. Each gesture repeated, each word spoken again, each glance, each mistake, each triumph, forever. At first, the thought may feel like a weight, an unbearable burden, the idea that even the smallest pains will be lived not only once but countless times. Yet Nietzsche posed it not as a curse but as a test, a mirror held to the heart to ask, if this were true, could one embrace it? Could one say yes to the totality of existence, to the light and the shadow, the sweetness and the bitterness, as if they were inseparable notes in the same music? To live as though the eternal recurrence were real is to live without reservation, to choose each act as if it were to echo across eternity, to stand before life and affirm it wholly without wishing a single moment away. The candle before us burns with the same silent repetition. Each flicker is both new and the same, a dance of light that will appear and vanish in countless forms, yet always aflame. The idea does not demand belief in a literal cycle. It asks instead whether one can meet life with such depth of acceptance that even if all returned forever, nothing in it would be denied. It is a call to live so completely that time itself, in its endless turning, would become not a prison, but a celebration, a circle one would step into again and again, not in resignation, but in joy.